What chance did a woman have in a naval courtroom when the very laws condemning piracy were crafted by men who believed a female pirate was a perversion of nature itself? History reveals the answer clearly: almost none. Women caught under the black flag rarely found mercy. During the so-called Golden Age of piracy in the 17th and 18th centuries, British admiralty courts were unflinching toward any pirate. But female defendants faced an even harsher fate. They were judged not only for breaking imperial law, but for defying deeply ingrained gender expectations. Trials were conducted in makeshift naval courts convened in colonies like Jamaica or New Providence, often without juries and with outcomes already decided before proceedings began. The process was swift but theatrical, designed to reinforce authority and instill fear. Testimonies were gathered from ship captains, naval officers, and sailors who were often desperate to avoid being seen as pirate sympathizers themselves. For the accused, there were virtually no rights or protections. Anne Bonny and Mary Read, two of the most notorious women ever to sail as pirates, were captured in 1720 and tried in Spanish Town, Jamaica. According to official records, when Anne Bonny was sentenced to hang, she turned to her lover, the pirate captain Calico Jack, and spat out words of fury and contempt. "If you had fought like a man, you need not have been hanged like a dog." Their only defense was their pregnancies, invoked through the rare plea known as pleading the belly, which provided temporary reprieve. It was one of the few legal shields available to women. But for most female pirates, this defense never came, and their trials ended in silence as the verdict of death loomed long before they ever spoke a word in their own defense. On the banks of the Thames, near London's notorious Execution Dock, the river flowed quietly past Wapping, even as crowds gathered to watch the brutal conclusion of pirate trials. Here, pirates, both men and the few women who took to the seas, were hanged above the rising and falling tides. British maritime law made no distinction in punishment by gender. Piracy was a capital crime under the Piracy Act of 1698, which decreed that all convicted pirates should suffer death. These executions were overseen by the admiralty and carried out publicly to send a grim message across the empire. The choice of Execution Dock was deliberate. Pirates died over the same waters that once offered them freedom. A final, bitter irony. Condemned prisoners were marched from Newgate Prison through the streets of London, paraded in open carts under the watch of armed guards, while jeering crowds lined the way. Upon arrival at Wapping, they stood beneath the gallows, a noose often already tight around their necks. But the drop from the scaffold was intentionally short, ensuring a slow, excruciating strangulation rather than a swift, merciful death. This method, known as the Marshal's Dance, saw bodies convulsing violently in front of horrified onlookers before falling still. Even though female executions were less common, they were every bit as savage. Mary Critchett, an American woman who joined a band of escaped convicts turned pirates in 1729, was captured near Virginia and tried in Williamsburg. Found guilty, she was sentenced without hesitation and hanged. There was no plea of pregnancy to save her. Her death was swift, her memory almost immediately forgotten. Executions were crafted to terrify as much as to punish. The worst offenders were sometimes gibbeted, left hanging in chains until three tides had washed over their bodies. Though more commonly inflicted on male pirates, the mere threat of such treatment reminded all who watched that piracy would not be tolerated, no matter a pirate's gender. These gruesome scenes reduced women who had once been feared aboard their ships to powerless figures dangling from ropes, transformed into cautionary tales used to uphold order and imperial control. Before the gallows claimed them, many female pirates felt the bite of the lash. Flogging was an ancient and brutal punishment frequently used by naval officers and colonial governors to exact pain and public humiliation. When inflicted on women, it carried an added layer of cruelty. Their bodies became living warnings. Their screams and the sight of their torn flesh served as lessons for those who gathered to watch. Floggings were administered with the cat-o'-nine tails, a whip with knotted cords capable of shredding skin with each blow. Sentences ranged from a dozen lashes to over 100, depending on the severity of the crime and the mood of the court. These punishments were carried out publicly, often on the docks or outside prison gates, where townspeople, including women and children, gathered to witness the spectacle. Anne Bonny and Mary Read endured horrid conditions in Jamaican prisons after capture. While records do not confirm that they were flogged, many women captured elsewhere, off the coasts of the American colonies or the Caribbean, were whipped as part of their sentences or to force confessions. For colonial authorities, flogging female pirates was both deterrent and degradation. It was not enough to punish them. They had to be broken in spirit and body before the public eye. Blood spilled on cobblestones beneath the hot sun was a powerful message. Women who dared to sail and fight like men would be stripped of dignity and reduced to objects of horror. These punishments were not only a means of enforcing justice, but a method of instilling fear, ensuring the power of the empire remained unchallenged. Yet, not every captured female pirate was executed or whipped. In colonial ports across the Caribbean, West Africa, and the Americas, some women faced an arguably crueler fate, forced into concubinage, coerced labor, or outright slavery. While direct records of female pirates sold into bondage are scarce, historians agree that the fates of women aboard pirate ships varied widely depending on their nationality, race, and the whims of colonial officials. In Spanish and Portuguese colonies, where distinctions between piracy, privateering, and enslavement often blurred, women taken from pirate vessels, especially those of African or indigenous heritage, were sometimes sold as spoils of war, regardless of their true status. Records from ports like Cartagena and Portobelo during the late 1600s and early 1700s describe women seized from pirate crews being processed directly into slavery. Black and mixed-race women were frequently presumed to be slaves already and were absorbed into plantation economies or kept as domestic servants or concubines by wealthy colonists. The lack of clear records makes it impossible to draw sharp distinctions between female pirates, captives, or other women aboard seized ships. But what is certain is that forced servitude was common. For many, capture did not end in the public drama of the gallows, but in the quiet erasure of lives spent toiling in anonymity. Their stories disappeared into plantation ledgers and household inventories, their identities dissolved by an imperial system that thrived on forgetting those it exploited. For some women, Death came neither quickly nor in the open, but slowly and unseen aboard the rotting hulks of prison ships. As jails filled and overflowed in the 18th century, colonial and naval authorities turned to old, decommissioned warships. These vessels, stripped of rigging and left to decay, were anchored in harbors like Portsmouth, Plymouth, or Kingston and transformed into floating prisons. Conditions aboard these ships were horrific. Prisoners were chained below deck in dark, suffocating holds where disease spread with lethal speed. Typhus, dysentery, and smallpox claimed countless lives. Food was scarce, water was often contaminated, and fresh air was almost non-existent. For women confined aboard these hulks, dangers multiplied. Beyond hunger and illness, many faced exploitation and abuse from guards or sailors. Violence, rarely recorded in official documents, but hinted at in personal letters and journals of the time. Female prisoners were particularly vulnerable because they had no recognized rights or protections. Their suffering was seldom noted by authorities, who viewed them as insignificant or unworthy of record. These women often died anonymously, their final moments unmarked by witnesses or memorials. The silence of these ships was more than an absence of sound. It was an intentional act of erasure, a way to make inconvenient lives simply vanish. While some pirates were immortalized in trial records or execution broadsheets, these women disappeared from history entirely, consumed by the dark holds of prison hulks. The brutal punishments faced by female pirates, whether in the noose, beneath the lash, sold into bondage, or left to rot in floating coffins, reveal a deeper truth about the maritime world of empire and trade. Women who dared to defy the rigid rules of society and seize freedom on their own terms were not only hunted, but subjected to punishments crafted to break them completely. Their suffering was designed to send a message that went beyond law and order. It spoke to a fear of women who stepped outside the roles assigned to them. These forgotten stories still echo in the silence of prison ships and the shadows of old gallows. They raise a haunting question. What does it mean that so many of their lives were wiped from the record, remembered only through fragments and rumors? How should we judge the societies that erased them? Comment below. As Tacitus warned centuries ago, the more corrupt the state, the more numerous the laws.